I had been on my own since my parents passed away while I was in medical school, pushing me to rely solely on myself to carve out a future I could be proud of. After years of non-stop work, scrimping, and saving every extra penny, I finally managed to buy a townhouse. It wasn't just any townhouse, it was the culmination of my blood, sweat, and tears, sitting pretty in a decent neighborhood with a view of a cheerful little kindergarten across the street. The morning I bumped into Mark was like any other, except it wasn't. I'd grabbed my usual coffee from the corner cafe, a place where the barista knew my order by heart and didn't need to ask. Coffee in hand, I was lost in thoughts of my next shift at the hospital when it happened. I turned to leave and collided with someone, sending my hot coffee splashing all over both of us. "Jesus, watch where you're going," the guy exclaimed, a frown creasing his brow as he looked down at his soaked shirt. I felt my cheeks heat up with embarrassment. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. Here, let me help you clean that up," I stammered, feeling around my bag for some napkins, coming up empty. "Great." He sighed, then shook his head as he caught my flustered expression. "It's all right, no harm done. But I'm pretty sure these stains won't just wipe off with a napkin." "You're right, I'm so sorry. There's a laundromat around the corner. I can pay for the cleaning, it's the least I can do." He raised an eyebrow, then a small, amused smirk played on his lips. "Lead the way then, coffee spiller." As we walked to the laundromat, the initial awkwardness gave way to a more relaxed conversation. He introduced himself as Mark, a realtor who had just moved into the area. "What about you? I haven't seen you around before," he said as we handed his shirt over to the laundromat attendant. "I'm Ella," I replied. "I live just a few blocks from here. And yeah, usually I'm holed up at the hospital or resting at home, so not much of a local social butterfly." We sat down at a nearby diner while waiting for his shirt. Over a couple of coffees, carefully kept at a safe distance from him this time, we chatted about mundane things like work and our neighborhood. It was refreshing, talking to someone new without any pretensions. "Look, Ella," he said as we walked back to pick up his shirt, now stain-free, "I owe you one for helping me out. Let me take you out for dinner, my treat. No more coffee disasters, I promise." I hesitated for a split second. He seemed genuine, and after the morning's debacle, I felt like I could use a night out. "Alright, Mark, it's a deal. But if this is some elaborate scheme to get free medical advice, you'll be disappointed. Don't worry, I'll try to keep it strictly non-medical. How's Friday night?" "Friday works. It's a date then," I said, handing him his shirt. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him go, I couldn't help but think maybe this strange encounter might just be a good thing. After that accidental coffee spill and the subsequent shirt rescue mission, Mark and I began to see more of each other. It started with that promised dinner, which turned out to be a delightful evening at a local Italian place he swore was the best in town. Mark was easy to talk to, and for a guy who sold houses for a living, he sure knew a lot about a lot of things. As the evening wound down, he looked at me, a playful challenge in his eyes. "So, life-changing enough for you?" I laughed, nodding. "Alright, you win this round." The pasta was fantastic. From then on, it seemed like we were inseparable. He was always planning something interesting for us to do, whether it was a movie night, a visit to a local art exhibit, or just a simple walk in the park. Mark had a knack for making everyday things feel special. One evening, as we were walking along the river, watching the city lights reflect on the water, he stopped and looked at me with those earnest eyes of his. "Ella, I've got to tell you something." "What's up?" I asked, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. "I'm falling pretty hard for you," he said, his voice low. "And I don't want to scare you off, but I feel like this could be something real." I took a deep breath, the night air cool on my face. "I'm falling too, Mark. And no, you're not scaring me off." A few months into our whirlwind romance, during a cozy dinner at my place, Mark had insisted on cooking to prove he could rival the pasta from our first date. He surprised me with a question that stopped me dead in my tracks. He had just served us some ridiculously good lasagna when he turned to me, took my hands in his, and said, "Ella, I know it's been a quick ride for us, but when you know, you just know. Marry me?" I didn't need time to think about it, it felt right. "Yes, Mark. Yes, I'll marry you." That night, we talked about our future, about finding a place together, and starting a family. Everything felt like it was falling into place, and I couldn't remember the last time I had been this happy. However, the arrival of Mark's parents from Thailand just before our wedding brought a shift I hadn't anticipated. They had lived abroad for many years but decided to return permanently when they heard about their son's imminent wedding. At first, they seemed lovely, full of warm smiles and enthusiastic embraces. "We're so thrilled to finally meet the woman who captured our Mark's heart," his mother had gushed, squeezing my hands with both of hers. His father, a robust man with a hearty laugh, clapped Mark on the shoulder, saying, "You've chosen well, son. We're excited to be part of this joyous occasion." Their friendliness was comforting, and I felt hopeful about our new family dynamics. But their initial friendliness soon gave way to an overwhelming sense of intrusion. Linda, Mark's mother, took to our home like she owned the place, and her husband, Jim, wasn't far behind in making his presence felt. It started with small things. Linda would rearrange my kitchen whenever she came over, which was almost every day. "Ella, you really should keep the spices near the stove. Saves time," she would say, moving things around without waiting for my response. I bit my tongue, trying to keep the peace. Then came the comments about how I managed the house. One afternoon, while I was trying to relax with a book, Linda plopped down next to me and sighed. "You know, dear, it wouldn't hurt to dust a bit more often. And maybe some fresh flowers would brighten up the place. It looks a bit drab." Jim had his own way of butting in. He'd follow Mark around, questioning his decisions about work and our finances. I overheard him one day in the garage, his voice stern. "You're letting her handle the money? You need to keep an eye on that, son. Make sure it's spent wisely." Their constant presence was suffocating, but the breaking point came when Linda decided we should host a party for her friends, without even asking us. "It'll be just a small gathering," she assured, waving her hand dismissively as if it was no big deal. When I tried to talk to Mark about it, hoping he would intervene, he just shrugged. "Mom likes to host. Let her have this one. It makes her happy, and it's not like it's a huge imposition, right?" I gave in. The small gathering turned out to be a full-blown bash with more than 20 people, all from Linda's circle of friends, who seemed to think they were at some sort of weekly social club that just happened to be in my living room. I spent the whole day cooking and preparing, only to end up feeling like a stranger at my own party. Linda introduced me around as if she was the lady of the house, and I was just some sort of assistant. "Ella helped out," she would say, patting my arm while her friends nodded politely before turning back to her. The final straw was when I heard one of her friends, a loud woman with a booming laugh, comment, "Linda, you've got this place whipped into shape. Mark was smart to bring you back here." I clenched my fists, my face hot with embarrassment and rage. As soon as the last guest left, I turned to Mark. "This can't happen again. It's not okay, and you know it." He looked tired, rubbing his forehead. I know. It's just. Mom can be a lot. But what am I supposed to do? She's my mom." "But I'm your wife," I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "That should count for something, shouldn't it?" He didn't have an answer for me, and that night, I lay awake, wondering if this was how the rest of my life would look. Sidelined in my own home, bending backward to accommodate people who clearly had no respect for my boundaries. Saturday after Saturday, my house transformed into a hub for Linda's endless social gatherings. Every week, the invasion of her friends, along with their opinions and laughter, grated on me more. It wasn't just the noise or the mess, it was the sheer disregard for our personal space. And each event left me feeling more like an outsider in my own home. The day I put my foot down, everything blew up. I told Linda politely, but firmly, I'm sorry, but we can't host the party every Saturday. It's too much. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. Too much? You ungrateful girl, this is what family does for each other. We host, we entertain, we support. Her voice rose with each word, and I felt the walls of my own home closing in on me. Linda, please lower your voice. Let's talk about this calmly. But calm was nowhere on her agenda. Her face turned a shade of red I'd only seen in movies. She started pacing around, waving her arms, and then, to my horror, she began throwing decorative cushions across the room as if each one bore my face. You listen here. If you don't agree to these small favors, I can make things very difficult for you, my girl. She was shouting now, and her words sliced through any pretense of familial warmth we might have had. When she threatened to have me divorced from her son if I didn't comply, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Mark will listen to me. He always has. Don't think he'll choose you over his own mother. I was reeling. The woman was using divorce as a weapon to keep me in line. It hit me then, how deeply Mark was tied to his mother's apron strings. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Mark, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. Mom, what's going on here? He looked from his fuming mother to me, his eyes wide with confusion. Your wife is being unreasonable, Mark. I'm only asking for a little cooperation, and she's denying us that. Mark glanced at me, his face pleading for peace. Ella, can't we just... No, Mark, we can't. My voice was firm, stronger than I felt. This isn't about a party. It's about respect and boundaries. Your mother just threatened to break us up. Mark's eyes flickered with shock, first at me, then at his mother. Mom, you didn't. Linda's gaze didn't waver, she was ready for battle. I did, and I will if she doesn't start showing some respect around here. She turned around and left the room, slamming the door loudly. Taking a deep breath, I made a choice, a radical one. Mark, I think we need to separate. Not for real, just on paper. We need to show your mom that we make our decisions together, not under duress. It took a lot of convincing, a lot of tearful discussions, and heartfelt promises that this was just a tactic, not the end for us. So, we did. We filed for divorce quietly, a sham for freedom. It was the hardest decision of my life, pretending to split from the man I loved to save our marriage from the overbearing clutches of his mother. The next Saturday, when Linda and her entourage of friends showed up at the house for their usual gathering, they were in for a surprise. I was waiting for them on the front porch, my posture rigid and my resolve firm. As Linda stepped out of her car, her smile faded when she saw me standing alone, door firmly shut behind me. Ella, dear, aren't you going to let us in? We have our little gathering, remember? Her voice carried that familiar commanding tone, but today, I was not going to yield. No, Linda. There won't be any gathering here today. Or any other day, I replied, my voice steady. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? This is my son's house, and I decide. It was your son's house. I corrected her sharply, cutting off her words. And as of last week, it's mine alone. We're divorced, Linda. Mark isn't living here anymore, and he won't be a part of these gatherings. Her mouth fell open, disbelief etching her features. Divorced? That's not possible. Mark would never. He did, Linda. And he agreed it was for the best, I said, not letting her intimidate me anymore. The power I felt at that moment, reclaiming my space and my life, was exhilarating. This is nonsense, she exclaimed, her voice rising. I'll call him right now. He'll straighten this out. Linda fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she dialed Mark. I could hear the dial tone, then Mark's voice answering. The conversation was brief, and Linda's face fell with each word Mark spoke. Turning back to me, her eyes filled with fury, she hissed, "You're ruining our family. You have no idea what you've just started." I know exactly what I'm doing, Linda. I'm ending the chaos you bring into my life every week. This is my home, and I will not be hosting or accommodating your social life anymore. The other women, who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention, began to murmur among themselves, their eyes darting between Linda and me. With a huff, Linda turned on her heel, her friends trailing behind her like lost puppies. They got into their cars and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a profound silence behind. After the sham divorce, Mark and I maintained our relationship secretly, meeting in less conspicuous places and spending time together like two teenagers sneaking around. It was absurd and painful, but necessary. One chilly evening, Mark texted me, "Meet me at the Old Town Diner. The one with the busted neon sign. Need to see you." Reading his message, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I threw on my coat and headed out, making sure to keep my head down as I walked into the diner. It was a quiet place, mostly forgotten by the town's newer residents, which made it perfect for us. As I slid into the booth across from Mark, I could see he was tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Hey," I whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Hey," he whispered back, a small smile breaking through his fatigue. "I've missed you." "Me too," I said, my heart aching a bit. "How are you holding up?" Mark sighed, his gaze dropping to our intertwined hands. "It's been hard, Ella. Not seeing you, not being able to just come home. Mom's been, well, she's been herself." I nodded, knowing all too well how overbearing Linda could be. "But we're doing the right thing, right? Keeping our distance, for now, to make her see we're serious about needing space?" "Yeah, we are. It's just tougher than I thought." Mark squeezed my hand a little tighter. "But how about you? How have you been handling the house all alone?" I shrugged. "It's been okay. Quiet. Peaceful, even. I just miss having you there. The house feels empty without you." The waitress came by then, dropping off 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of fries. We both thanked her and waited for her to leave before continuing. "Ella, I've been thinking," Mark said, breaking a fry in half. "Maybe we should start looking for a place of our own. Somewhere new, where we can start fresh, away from all this drama." A new place. The idea was both thrilling and daunting. "I like that idea, but what about the money? And the house?" "We'll figure it out," he said confidently. "I can handle the house, maybe even talk to a realtor about putting it on the market. As for money, well, we've always been good at managing that together." "True," I agreed, feeling a spark of hope at the thought of a new beginning just for us. "Let's do it. Let's find our own place, something that's just ours." We spent the next hour talking about potential areas to live in, types of houses we liked, and how we'd decorate our new place. It felt good to dream together, to plan a future that seemed a little brighter than the past few months had been. When it was time to leave, we stood outside the diner, the cool air making me shiver slightly. Mark took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. "I've got you," he said softly, pulling me into a hug. "I know," I whispered back, holding him tight. "And I've got you, too." We parted ways that night with a plan in mind, our spirits lifted by the promise of a new start. It wouldn't be easy, but with Mark by my side, I felt like we could handle anything. Even Linda. A year later, our persistence paid off. I had managed to save enough money, and Mark, using his skills as a realtor, found us the perfect place. It was a large, beautiful house in a wonderful area with a stunning garden. To celebrate and cement our reunion, we decided to get married again in a small, secret ceremony. It was just us and a couple of close friends who knew about our situation. As we exchanged vows for the second time, the weight of the past year seemed to lift. There were still remnants of our old life at the townhouse that we needed to gather up. We decided one Saturday morning to make the trip back to our old place and pick up the last few items. As we pulled up to the townhouse, I noticed a familiar car parked outside. It was Linda and Jim. They were standing by the front door, apparently waiting for us. When we got out of the car, Linda's face lit up with an unsettling kind of eagerness. We need to discuss the family get-togethers. Now that you're returning, we can start planning the next one right here. Mark's brow furrowed. Mom, we're not here to stay. We're just picking up some things. We've moved out. Her smile faltered for a moment, but quickly recovered. Moved out? Oh, but that means this place is free. I can use it for the parties then. It was like nothing had changed with her. I felt a flare of frustration, but kept my voice calm. Linda, we sold the townhouse. It's not ours anymore. We're here to collect the last of our things. The news seemed to take a moment to sink in. Linda's face went from confusion to shock, and then to a frown. Sold? But where will you live? Where will we have our gatherings? Mark took a step forward, his tone firmer. Mom, the townhouse is no longer our concern. And we're not disclosing where our new house is. I'm sorry for how things went before, but now, we're starting fresh. It's time for you and Dad to consider doing the same. Maybe travel again, like you used to. Linda's mouth opened and closed, her earlier enthusiasm dampened into a muted disbelief. Jim, who had been quietly observing the exchange, put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off, her gaze fixed on Mark. You're choosing her over your own family? Linda's voice cracked, a mix of anger and hurt. Mark nodded. Yes, Mom, I am choosing my wife. It's not about picking sides, it's about respecting our life together. Before Linda could say another word, Mark kissed my hands, an affirmation of his commitment in front of his parents. Linda stood frozen, her face a mask of frustration and disbelief. Jim seemed to realize the argument was lost and gently urged her back towards their car. After settling into our new home, the peace and quiet I had longed for felt like it was finally within reach. Mark and I reveled in our newfound privacy, cherishing the freedom that came with it. However, Linda wasn't ready to let us go without a fight. Her obsession with controlling us reached new heights when she started calling our friends, desperately trying to find out where we lived. Thankfully, our friends understood the situation and kept our new address confidential, supporting our decision to keep our lives private. Linda's frustration grew with each unsuccessful attempt, and soon she resorted to more direct confrontations. The phone calls began to increase, each one more demanding and invasive than the last. Mark and I decided early on that engaging with her would only encourage her behavior, so we started to ignore the calls. This seemed to infuriate her even more, pushing her to take drastic measures. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the hospital, I was walking to my car when I spotted Linda lurking near the staff parking lot. My heart sank as I realized she was waiting for me. As I approached, her face twisted into a mix of anger and determination. Ella, you can't ignore me forever. Tell me where you live. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet evening air. I kept my distance, my hand inching towards my phone. Linda, this needs to stop. You're not welcome here, and you're certainly not welcome in our lives if you continue this behavior. She scoffed, stepping closer, her presence more threatening. You think you can just shut me out? Mark is my son. I have rights. I could feel my patience wearing thin, and my concern for my own safety growing. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling security. This is harassment, Linda. Her eyes narrowed, not believing I would take a stand. You wouldn't dare. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed security. Within minutes, a security officer arrived, and I quickly explained the situation. Linda was still ranting as the officer approached us. The security officer stepped in, firmly. Ma'am, you need to leave the premises now. You are causing a disturbance. Linda's face flushed with anger, but the presence of security seemed to push her back into reality. She glanced between me and the officer, her resolve faltering. This isn't the end, she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction as she turned and hurried away. After the incident, I warned her that if she approached me again, I would not hesitate to involve the police and press charges for harassment. It seemed my firm stance finally made an impact. Linda's attempts to contact us abruptly stopped, Weeks later, Mark and I were relieved to hear from a mutual friend that Linda and Jim had decided to move back to Thailand permanently. The news brought a profound sense of relief. It felt like the final cloud hanging over our new life had been lifted, allowing us to truly start afresh.